All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're looking at a very specific and, honestly, a pretty alarming situation: the mounting property and casualty insurance crisis that's currently hitting utility-scale battery energy storage systems, commonly known as BSES. Now, BSES is literally the backbone of our modern energy grid, right? But there's this silent crisis happening that's threatening to completely stall massive projects before they even break ground. So, over the next few minutes, we're going to unpack exactly what's happening here. Why are underwriters suddenly pulling back so aggressively? And most importantly, what strategic approaches do developers need to take, like right now, to secure their coverage and maintain their bankability? Let's jump in. You know, there's a saying going around the industry right now that really hits the nail on the head. Securing property and casualty insurance for utility-scale BESS projects has quietly turned into one of the most brutal bottlenecks in the industry. And wow, think about that for a second. Just a short while ago, securing this coverage was, well, it was just a standard operational checkbox. You built a solid project, you got it insured, and you moved on. But today, it's a massive roadblock, catching developers and asset owners completely off guard. Because here's the harsh reality. If you cannot properly insure the asset, you absolutely cannot finance it. And when you can't finance it, boom, your entire timeline is derailed. Moving on to Section 1, the BESS insurance crisis. Let's see how this is actually unfolding on the ground. So the crucial point we're seeing across the board is basically twofold. Premiums are absolutely skyrocketing to unprecedented levels, or, and we're seeing this a lot more lately, coverage is just being denied outright. No way around it. And listen, this isn't just some administrative headache or a minor line item adjustment. These surging premiums and denied coverages are aggressively wrecking otherwise perfectly solid financial models. Think about it. You could have the absolute perfect location, guaranteed grid access, a rock-solid list of buyers, but if your property and casualty insurance costs blow up your operating expenses, the project economics simply collapse. The math just stops making sense. Which brings us to Section 2, the root of the problem. Why exactly is this happening? Well, the core culprit we've identified here is something called the historical loss data deficit. You see, the global insurance industry runs entirely on data, right? Underwriters want decades of actuarial tables and historical precedents to confidently price out risk. But utility-scale battery storage, at its current massive scale and with all its technological complexity, it's relatively new. Underwriters simply do not have that long-term data they usually rely on to calculate risk accurately. It's kind of like, imagine trying to insure a brand new electric hypercar, but the insurer is forcing you to use crash data from a 1990 station wagon. The data just doesn't match the tech. And when insurers face a data vacuum like this, they don't give you the benefit of the doubt. Oh no. Instead, they instantly pivot to highly conservative underwriting practices. They assume the worst, and they price your policy for the absolute worst-case scenario. So here's how that data deficit actually plays out in the real world. Because they lack this historical context, insurers fall back on traditional risk models. And the fundamental problem here is that these traditional models completely fail to accurately assess modern battery safety standards. Insurers are grappling with conservative risk modeling that essentially assumes all batteries carry the exact same fire and failure risks that older legacy technologies did years ago. As a result, every single megawatt hour of storage is treated with the exact same broad-stroke generic risk profile. It literally doesn't matter if you're utilizing cutting-edge, highly engineered technology or just some standard off-the-shelf system. The underwriter's model paints the entire industry with the exact same generic brush. Let's look at Section 3, wrecking solid financial models. This is where the friction really happens. Picture this disconnect. On one side of the table, you've got insurance underwriters assessing massive infrastructure projects with these broad-stroke assumptions and totally outdated risk modeling. Then on the other side of the table, you have the developers, the folks who are actually building these systems with incredible top-tier safety architectures. They're investing heavily in advanced engineering to mitigate risk, right? But that physical investment on the ground is completely disconnected from the paper models the insurers are using to calculate the premiums. And here's the tragic irony of the whole situation. Developers are spending immense extra capital on top-tier safety architectures. But because insurers are treating every megawatt hour generically, developers are essentially paying massive premiums for thermal risks that their engineers have already systematically designed out of the system. They are getting financially penalized regardless of how well they build. It's just a highly inefficient market dynamic. And frankly, it places a ridiculously heavy burden on good engineering. Fortunately, there are solutions. Let's head into Section 4, 3 strategic risk approaches. Yeah, there is a way out of this bottleneck, and we aren't just here to admire the problem today. These are the actionable, concrete solutions developers must adopt to shift the needle and get their projects insured.
To secure viable coverage and protect those vital project economics, developers have to proactively and clearly communicate a unique risk profile to insurers, and they do this using 3 very specific data-driven steps. First up, you have to force the conversation past generic risk assumptions. Do not let the underwriter use a default spreadsheet for your custom build. Second, you gotta bring the receipts. Provide granular, third-party validated operational data specifically focused on your thermal management systems. Show them exactly how your system regulates heat. And third, prove cell containment. You have to definitively demonstrate that if one single battery cell fails and catches fire, which can happen, it stays contained to that tiny unit and doesn't cascade into some catastrophic facility-wide blaze. This level of granularity, that is exactly how you build confidence and trust with an underwriter.
Which leads us nicely to our final part, Section 5, closing the bankability gap. Look, passively hoping the insurance market just eventually catches up, that is not a strategy. Bringing granular third-party validated data directly to the negotiating table is really the only way to pull underwriters out of their defensive posture and finally align their risk modeling with the reality of what is actually being built today. Which brings us to the ultimate question for everyone involved in this rapidly scaling space. Whether you're a project developer, an asset owner, or an insurance underwriter watching this explainer, how are you managing the widening gap between traditional risk assessments and actual project bankability? It's a massive systemic challenge, one that requires immediate cross-industry collaboration, transparent data sharing, and a real willingness to update those outdated models. I'm going to leave you with that final critical thought to ponder as we all navigate this crisis and work to keep these vital energy storage projects moving forward. Thanks for joining me, and keep innovating out there.